The Cocoanut Grove nightclub had been open for hours before anything went wrong. It was Saturday night, the start of Thanksgiving weekend in 1942. Boston was crowded with people on leave from the military. Sailors and soldiers filled the streets. Many of them were looking for somewhere to spend the evening before returning to duty. The Cocoanut Grove was one of the most popular places in the city. People knew it was difficult to get in. Lines formed early. Some waited outside for more than an hour. Being admitted meant something. It meant you had made it into one of the most exclusive clubs in Boston. Inside, the club was already over capacity. No one inside was counting. The building had been altered many times over the years. Walls had been added. Doors had been moved. Rooms had been subdivided to create private spaces. What had once been a straightforward layout had become a series of narrow corridors and disconnected rooms. Most patrons did not notice this. They followed waiters, they followed music, they followed other people. The lighting was intentionally low. It was part of the atmosphere. In some rooms, it was difficult to see the ceiling at all. Decorative materials were everywhere: fabric, paper, artificial palm fronds draped across walls and ceilings. None of it was fireproof. The Melody Lounge was in the basement. It was smaller, darker, and more crowded than the rooms above it. The ceiling was low enough that taller patrons could touch it with their hands. There were no windows. The only way in or out was a stairway leading up into the main part of the club. The air down there was already thick with cigarette smoke. People stood shoulder to shoulder. Drinks were passed over heads. Music played continuously. No one was thinking about exits. Above the Melody Lounge, the main floor was packed. Tables were close together. Coats were hung over chair backs and railings. Many patrons had no idea where the exits were besides the one they had entered through. They had not needed to know before. Several exits were present, but they were not obvious. Some were concealed behind curtains. Some were locked to prevent people from leaving without paying. Others were partially blocked by furniture or decorations. Staff knew which doors could be used. Patrons did not. The club had no sprinkler system. There were no illuminated exit signs. There was no fire alarm that could be heard throughout the building. None of this was unusual for the time. Shortly after 10 p.m., a problem occurred in the Melody Lounge. One of the light bulbs in a wall fixture had gone out. The room became even darker than usual. A busboy was told to fix it. He did not have a flashlight. No replacement bulb was available. He struck a match to see. Witnesses later disagreed on exactly what happened next. Some said the match was held too close to the wall. Others said it fell. What mattered was that the flame touched one of the decorative materials. The material ignited immediately. At first, the fire was small. It did not cause panic. Some people nearby did not even notice. The busboy tried to extinguish it himself. Someone threw a drink at the flame. That made it worse. The fire climbed the wall rapidly. The decorations acted as fuel. Flames moved upward into the ceiling area, where more flammable material was packed tightly together. Within seconds, the fire spread beyond the reach of anyone standing below it. Someone shouted for help. Another match was struck, briefly illuminating the ceiling as flames raced across it. The fire moved faster than expected. Much faster. Hot smoke began to collect at the ceiling level, then descended rapidly. The temperature in the room rose almost instantly. Breathing became difficult. People in the Melody Lounge rushed toward the stairs. The stairway filled with smoke immediately. Those at the front hesitated, unable to see. Those behind continued pushing forward, unaware of what was happening ahead. Within moments, the Melody Lounge was no longer survivable. Upstairs, music was still playing. Some patrons smelled smoke and assumed it was part of the environment. Cigarette smoke was constant in the club. At first, no one reacted. Then, the smoke thickened. Then people noticed heat. The fire reached the upper levels not as visible flames, but as smoke and gas. It moved through stairwells and ventilation spaces. It spread faster than people could understand. By the time anyone upstairs realized the seriousness of the situation, the fire had already taken control of the building's interior. The first visible signs of danger appeared on the main floor almost by accident. A waiter, coming from the direction of the basement stairwell, noticed smoke pushing up along the ceiling. It did not roll like normal smoke. It moved fast and low, spreading outward instead of rising. He stopped. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether this was something serious or just another malfunction. Smoke in the Cocoanut Grove was not unusual. Cigarettes burned constantly. Candles were everywhere. Then the smoke thickened enough to sting his eyes. Someone nearby asked what was wrong. Before he could answer, the lights dimmed again. Not all at once, just enough to be noticed. At first, people reacted slowly. Some stood up, others stayed seated, waiting for staff to say something. A few laughed nervously, assuming it was part of the entertainment or a brief interruption. No announcement was made. There was no alarm. Staff members closest to the stairwell began shouting for people to move toward the main entrance. Their voices were immediately drowned out by music and crowd noise. Then the heat arrived. It was not flame. It was a wave of hot air moving through the room. People closest to the stairwell felt it first. Some instinctively stepped back. Others turned around to look. What they saw was darkness filled with smoke. Panic did not explode immediately. It spread unevenly. In some sections of the club, people rushed toward exits they remembered. In others, confusion froze people in place. The layout worked against them. Hallways twisted. Rooms led into other rooms without clear direction. The main entrance became the focus almost instantly. Hundreds of people moved toward it at the same time. Those closest to the door slowed as they reached it. The opening was narrow. The pressure from behind increased. People began shouting for space. Some stumbled. When one person fell, others fell with them. The crowd continued to push. Inside the mass, people could not see the door. They only felt bodies pressing from all sides. Arms were pinned. Chests were compressed. Breathing became difficult even before smoke reached them. Those at the back had no idea what was happening at the front. They only knew that everyone was moving forward. Elsewhere in the club, patrons searched for side exits. Some found doors concealed behind curtains and decorations. They pulled on handles and found them locked. They tried again, harder this time. Nothing moved. Others ran into dead ends, walls where exits had once existed but had been sealed off during renovations. In one section, a revolving door jammed under pressure. People inside the door could not move forward or backward. The mechanism locked in place as bodies pressed against it. Behind them, more people continued pushing, unaware that the door had stopped turning. The pressure increased until no one inside the doorway could move at all. People began to scream that they could not breathe. Smoke thickened rapidly. It was no longer just irritating. It was choking. Toxic gases filled the air. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. People lowered themselves toward the floor instinctively, trying to find cleaner air. Many never stood up again. Some patrons broke windows in desperation. In a few cases, this saved lives. In others, it did nothing. Some windows were too small. Others were blocked by bars. Some people collapsed before they could climb through. Coats hanging from chairs and railings caught fire. Burning fabric fell onto the floor and onto people trying to crawl beneath the smoke. Shoes stuck to melting material. Hands slipped on debris. The fire itself moved faster than anyone could escape. It did not crawl along the floor. It surged through air spaces, fueled by decorations and fresh oxygen drawn in from broken windows and opened doors. Flames followed smoke paths, appearing suddenly in places that had seemed safe seconds earlier. By the time firefighters arrived, people were already pouring out of the building. Some ran, some stumbled. Some collapsed on the sidewalk just outside the entrance. Their clothes smoldered, their skin was burned, many were unconscious. Fire crews began pulling victims away from the doorway to clear space for others. They worked without knowing how many people were still inside. Inside the club, conditions worsened by the minute. The fire consumed oxygen rapidly, creating a vacuum effect. Fresh air was drawn inward, intensifying the flames. Heat built up faster than it could escape. Rescue attempts became increasingly dangerous. Firefighters entering the building did so blindly. They followed sound. They followed instinct. They found bodies piled near exits that had never opened. Some victims were found standing upright, trapped where they had been crushed by pressure from behind. Others were found seated at tables, overcome before they had time to move. Within minutes, entire sections of the club became inaccessible. The fire did not rage for hours. It burned intensely and quickly. By the time it began to die down, the damage was already irreversible. Inside the Cocoanut Grove, the conditions passed a point of recovery. Firefighters who entered the building quickly realized that movement inside was nearly impossible. Smoke was so dense that visibility dropped to zero within a few steps. Heat pressed down from above, forcing them to crawl. Every breath through their masks felt thick and heavy. They followed sounds, shouts, coughing, then silence. In some rooms, they found people collapsed near walls, their hands still pressed against surfaces as if trying to steady themselves. In others, bodies were piled together, all facing the same direction, indicating where they had believed an exit was. Many of those found were not burned. They had been overcome by smoke and toxic gases. Carbon monoxide and other combustion byproducts had filled the air faster than flames could reach them. People lost consciousness where they stood or sat. In one section near the main entrance, firefighters encountered a mass of bodies blocking the doorway from the inside. The pile was so dense that it took time to understand what they were seeing. People had been pressed together under enormous force. Some had been crushed. Others had suffocated standing upright. Removing bodies was slow and difficult. Every removal exposed another person behind them. Outside, the scene grew more chaotic. Ambulances arrived and left continuously. Victims were laid out on the sidewalk and in the street. Some were wrapped in coats or blankets. Others were treated where they lay. Doctors and nurses who lived nearby rushed to help. No one knew how many people were inside. Hospitals across Boston were alerted almost immediately. Emergency rooms began clearing space. Non-critical patients were moved. Additional staff were called in. Within minutes, hospitals were overwhelmed. Victims arrived faster than they could be treated. Burn units filled instantly. Hallways became treatment areas. Supplies ran low. Doctors made rapid decisions about who needed immediate care and who could wait. Some patients never regained consciousness. As the fire continued to burn, firefighters focused less on rescue and more on containment. The structure itself was at risk. Roof sections weakened. Interior supports failed. Entry points became unsafe. At a certain point, no more rescue attempts were possible. The fire was brought under control in less than half an hour. The damage had already been done. When daylight came, the scale of the disaster became clear. Bodies were removed throughout the night and into the morning. They were taken to makeshift morgues set up nearby. Identification was slow and difficult. Many victims carried no identification. Many were burned beyond recognition. Families gathered at hospitals, police stations, and temporary morgues. They waited for names. Lists were incomplete. Information changed constantly. Some families searched for hours, believing loved ones were still missing, only to learn later that they had already been identified among the dead. The official death toll rose steadily. First dozens, then hundreds. By the end, 492 people were confirmed dead. It was the deadliest nightclub fire in modern history. Investigators moved quickly. They documented the building layout. They measured exits. They examined decorations. They reconstructed the path of the fire. Every failure became clear. Flammable materials had covered walls and ceilings. Exits had been locked or hidden. There were no sprinklers, no alarms, no illuminated exit signs. The building had been allowed to operate far beyond safe capacity. None of this violated existing laws. That fact shocked the public. The Cocoanut Grove Fire triggered immediate change. Fire codes were rewritten. Occupancy limits became enforceable. Exit requirements were standardized. Revolving doors were required to be paired with outward opening exits. Sprinkler systems became mandatory in public spaces. Emergency medicine also changed. Doctors studying the survivors observed patterns in burn treatment and smoke inhalation. New approaches to fluid resuscitation were developed. Burn care advanced rapidly as a result of what they learned that night. The club never reopened. The building was later torn down. What remained was not a story of one mistake or one person. It was a story of assumptions, that crowded spaces were safe, that nothing would go wrong, that rules were unnecessary because disaster was unlikely. That night proved otherwise. By the early morning hours, the fire scene itself was quiet, but the rest of the city was not. Hospitals across Boston were operating beyond anything they had prepared for. Ambulances had stopped arriving, but the patients were still coming in waves, brought by police cars, private vehicles, and sometimes on foot. Stretchers filled hallways. Patients lay on floors when no beds were available. Nurses wrote names on scraps of paper, tape, and bandages because formal charts could not be created fast enough. Many survivors could not speak. Smoke inhalation had burned their airways, making breathing painful and shallow. Some coughed continuously. Others were unconscious. Doctors focused first on keeping airways open, then on burns, then on injuries caused by crushing and falls. Decisions were made quickly, often without complete information. In several hospitals, staff began grouping patients by severity because there were not enough doctors to treat everyone at once. Some patients who appeared stable were placed aside, only to deteriorate suddenly hours later. Doctors learned quickly that smoke damage could be delayed and deadly. Families began arriving before sunrise. Some came because they knew their relatives had been at the Cocoanut Grove. Others came because someone had not come home. A coat was still missing. A phone call had not been returned. A name had been mentioned by someone else waiting in a hospital hallway. Hospitals could not provide clear answers. Staff were overwhelmed and had no complete lists of survivors or fatalities. Families waited in corridors, watching stretchers pass, trying to recognize faces beneath soot, bandages, and oxygen masks. Some believed they recognized someone, followed the stretcher, and were told they could not enter treatment areas. Police stations became informal information centers. Missing person reports were written by hand. Officers compared notes between hospitals, fire departments, and temporary morgues. Names were misspelled. Ages were guessed. Some people were listed twice. Others were not listed at all. Temporary morgues were established because existing facilities could not handle the number of bodies. Bodies were placed in rows. Tags were attached where possible. Identification was slow and often incomplete. In many cases, clothing had burned away. Faces were damaged. Some victims carried no personal items at all. Families were asked to help identify the dead. They were shown jewelry, watches, fragments of clothing. Some were asked about dental records. In certain cases, families were asked to view bodies directly. Many could not bring themselves to do it. Others tried repeatedly, leaving without certainty. The official death count continued to rise over the next 2 days. Some victims who had survived the fire died later from lung damage. Others developed complications from burns and shock. Doctors observed patterns they had not fully understood before. Patients with relatively minor burns sometimes died, while others, with severe burns, survived. Medical practice changed during that week. Doctors adjusted fluid treatments. They monitored breathing more aggressively. They recognized that smoke inhalation required long-term care even after patients appeared stable. These observations would later influence burn treatment protocols nationwide. Funerals began almost immediately. Churches filled. Services overlapped. Notices appeared in newspapers listing multiple funerals on the same day. Entire neighborhoods seemed connected to the fire through someone they knew or had lost. Investigations moved forward at the same time. Fire officials documented the building in detail. They measured exits, noted which doors had been locked, which were hidden, and where decorations had created fuel pathways. Survivors and firefighters gave consistent accounts: doors that would not open, exits they could not find, pressure from crowds that made movement impossible. The Cocoanut Grove never reopened. The building was later demolished. Nothing of the interior was preserved. The name remained, but the physical space disappeared. For survivors, the fire did not end that night. Some lived with permanent injuries. Others carried memories they struggled to escape. Crowded rooms caused panic. Darkness caused anxiety. Many avoided public spaces entirely. Some never spoke about what they had experienced. Boston continued because it had no choice. But the fire remained present, not as a single moment, but as a reference, a reminder of how quickly ordinary places could become lethal, not through one dramatic failure, but through many small decisions that had never been tested until there was no time left.